were able to get a judge to decide that the legislature had unconstitutionally delegated the authority to set tolls to Virginia Department of Transportation and the private actor. Well, this is $2 billion on the table, and if this agreement, if these tolls are deemed unconstitutional, that means VDOT is on the hook for $2 billion, or the Commonwealth of Virginia is on the hook for $2 billion. But it has implications that are pretty broad. We have a new subway line, or metro line that's going from, going out to Dulles Airport, the Silver Line. It's a $7 billion project or something, and it's got a variety of funding sources, but the source of funding of last resort is a toll road that goes parallel to the line out to Dulles Airport, and so the tolls on that road are rising to pay for the transit line. Now, what benefit to the toll payers is there of having the transit line in the middle? Some people would claim that all those metro riders would be on that toll road jamming it up if they weren't on the Silver Line. But when you're talking a couple $1 billion in project costs that are being laid on the toll payers, you could say it's a tax, and if that's a tax, and so Fairfax County, interestingly, was filed a friend of the court brief on the appeal to this, and so it's a really interesting project. They just I think it's here. Supreme Court of Virginia had hearings on this in September of this year. Ruling is expected. But it speaks to this issue of delegation of tolling authority to non-governmental entities and to non-elected offices. And I think that's a really interesting, question.
My monthly electric bill is and therefore tax.
There are taxes on yourself. If you've looked at your cell phone bill carefully,
it means to look like, where does this stop?
Yeah. Well, I think there are taxes on your electric bill, but there's a Public Utilities Commission that governs the rates on your electric bill. There's a Public Utilities Commission that governs, or a public authority that governs your water rates. And so, there are public bodies, but this issue of what can be delegated and what has to be voted on in the legislature is a big issue in P3s that I think is going to be there. So I just put a multi-jurisdictional P3s. How do you do this in a multi-jurisdictional environment? It was a really interesting question. Air rights, I didn't have time to talk about that project, but we're looking at air rights in urban settings. Often that air rights over the highway are extremely valuable, and can they be developed in a P3 setting? We're doing some executive education, and I think I wanted to mention this issue. The tax deducted, our federal policy, probably the most important federal P3 policy, has nothing to do with traditional P3s. It's the provision that says that the interest on municipal bonds is tax deductible to federal taxpayers. So that reduces the interest costs of municipal debt. And there's a question about whether that changes the behavior of asset owners in a way to say we have cheap capital, so we'll just under-maintain and rebuild faster. Contractors love it. It's like, yeah, we'll build it again tomorrow if you want me to, but if you want us to build it after 20, rebuild it after 20 years instead of 50 years, we can do that. So what is that? And we're trying to get our arms around how would you research that question. That's one of the things. So let me stop there and take any other questions of mine or comments, rebuttals. Yes.
So when you say air rights, like over highways, how would people be envisioning that those would be developed?
I have a slide of that. Let's see if I can. There. So I-66 is is an urban interstate that goes from Washington D.C. to the west. Goes through a little right on the northern Virginia boundary at the Potomac River is a community called Rosslyn, which has been very highly developed. So it's got lots of skyscrapers. There's no height limit. Washington D.C. has a height limit. So this is where 66 passes through the center of Rosslyn. This is a park that Rosslyn got Arlington County was able to get the feds to pay for when they originally constructed the highway. This is the site that's being considered for air rights. So they would bridge over the highway and build a development there. And so they're using public right-of-way. There's a big structural cost, of course, of bridging that over. There are a lot of agreements about operations, lighting, snow, ice removal, and those sorts of things. So they're just at the RFI stage for that, and I think that closed in September. To see is this, are the values per square foot high enough that getting, access to 70,000 square foot site is enough to overcome the significant costs of development. Any other questions?
This is absolutely fascinating, and it must be incredibly multidisciplinary. Are there similar programs at other universities? Are you encountering law schools?
Well, of course, George Mason is unique and outstanding in the world on this. No, I mean, that's really what our center's about, is looking at P3 policy. There's a training element, a pipeline element, sort of who are the people who are going to go into the state DOTs and into the private employers who understand this in a highway, it's largely highway, but also transit and rail setting. How do you have the capacity as a state entity to be to enter into smart 800-page agreements, that actually protect the public interest. And I think, as I said, there's a lot of work on the financial engineering piece, on the project delivery construction engineering piece, but the policy realm, there isn't as much. There are people, Rick Geddes at Cornell, there's Andrew White, I think, at Stanford, and a couple other people who are working in these areas. But it's a really interesting area, and I think, given the number of states who are moving into it, I think an area that has some really interesting questions to ask.
I'm sorry, we have to actually kind of wrap this up because there's a class coming up. But let's thank our speaker. And lunches that were supposed to be delivered an hour ago, they're here now. So you can pick them up on your way out. Just make sure that you sign the sign-in sheet, because we need to have your name saying that you're here. And